Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? Good? Good. I'm Dr. Mike Rodriguez. I'm director of our Men's Resource Center here. That's part of CUNY's Black Male Initiative program. And I'm very happy to be here this afternoon. And I'm very excited to listen to our keynote today. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Allen Newton. I'll briefly read his bio. Allen Newton came to be aware of the criminal justice system through the eyes of an innocent man after being wrongfully convicted in 1985 and then finally exonerated on July 6, 2006, after serving 22 years in New York State prisons. After initially requesting DNA testing in 1988 and again in 1994, testing was denied because the evidence was presumed to be lost. In 2005, at the Innocence Project's request, the Bronx County District Attorney's Office found the rape kit after an exhaustive search with the help of the Innocence Project, who secured DNA testing for Mr. Newton that proved his innocence. Soon after being exonerated, in August of 2006, he enrolled at Medgar Evers College with the support from the Thurgood Marshall Scholarship Fund and has since obtained a bachelor's degree in business management. With a goal now of entering law school, Mr. Newton has taken the LSATs and applied to various law schools for admission. While serving as an advocate for the wrongly convicted since his release, Mr. Newton has always worked tirelessly to make the criminal justice seem more fair and just. Mr. Newton has testified before the New York City Council on evidence preservation and identification issues, spoken out on reforms in Albany, assisted in training students at the Innocence Project, and has spread the word about wrongful convictions at universities, colleges, and civil groups throughout the country. Recently, working with CUNY's Black Male Initiative program, Mr. Newton is also the co-founder of Advocates for Freedom, Transformation and Exonerated Rights, Inc., and plans to attend law school in the near future. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Mr. Allen Newton.
Good afternoon. Oh, good afternoon. Okay, I was wondering what kind of crowd I had here. Day after the election. Everybody feeling good? Just mercy. Just mercy. We all need compassion, though, regardless of the circumstances. This country's been here for a long time, but we're going to still keep striving. Trust me, I had 50 years. I really understand what it means to be buried. I had 50 years. When I was sentenced to that time, I could see a lot of faces in this crowd was definitely not here. I was arrested in 1984. But let me go back to that though, because I always like to speak to young people about straddling offenses and things that go on in their life. My case actually started 5 years before that. When I graduated high school in 1979, I was out partying. I got in trouble. I got in a fight with some other young men about my age. I could have walked away from that fight. I could have walked away, but pride and... So I got arrested for misdemeanor assault. I accepted responsibility. I started working as a bank teller right out of high school. Went to the New York Telephone Company after that, working as a business representative, opening up business accounts. And that 5-year-old arrest came back to haunt me, because a woman was attacked in the Bronx. I was living in the Bronx at the time. On that particular night, I was in Queens with my fiancée and her family. Like I said, 5 years before that, I got arrested. I had a photograph in the book. And the woman picked out that photograph and said I was the one that attacked her. She was walking in the Bronx about 3 o'clock in the morning. She went into the store, buy a can of beer. She said a guy came into the store after her. He bought some cigarettes. He paid for his purchase and left, she said. She said when she paid for her purchase, she walked out the store, and this guy abducted her, forced her into his car, took her into a park, a Torrent Park in the Bronx. He raped her, robbed her, and sodomized her. She said she ran after the guy to get her money back. Said the guy gave her money back, $15. She said she took the money and went to catch a cab to go home. While she was waiting to catch this cab, she said this guy came and abducted her again. This time he took an abandoned building. Y'all with me now, right? The same guy. This time he raped her again. He robbed her for the second time. She said this is her testimony. And he cut her in her left eye. Everything that happened in the park, I was found not guilty. Everything that happened in the building, I was found guilty. Y'all with me? It's the same victim, said the same person attacked her 2 times. So half the charges I was found not guilty, the other half I was found guilty. Why? Why? We asked that question. Well, the store clerk had a different testimony. She said the guy paid for his purchase, was waiting in the car, and she said he was honking the horn, the female victim. Now the victim testified she ain't know this guy from nowhere. The store clerk also testified that when the victim walked out the store, she walked into the passenger side of the car on her own. Y'all with me now? So when the jury came to a decision about what happened, they advised my lawyer, we felt the victim and attacker knew each other, and something went wrong. Because the store clerk said the victim walked into the car on her own. But as I said, I was arrested for rape, robbery, kidnapping, attempted murder, weapons charges. I was convicted of rape, robbery, and assault, and 3 charges that happened in the building. The victim lost her eye. We know that happened for a fact. She definitely lost her eye under this attack. I testified on my own behalf, had my fiance testify, and her daughter testified that I was in Queens at the time, in a family house. My fiance's dad, a former correction officer, went to the Bronx County District Attorney's office and told them I was in his 2-family house that night at 3 o'clock in the morning. And there's no way in the world I would have been able to go from the Bronx to Queens and back. But nevertheless, I was convicted of that crime and sentenced to 40 years in jail. May 31st, 1985, the jury came back with that verdict. The judge sentenced me to 40 years. I started doing that time. I was sent to 12 different prisons right here in New York State. And one of the first things I did as a pro se litigant, I filed a motion to try to test the biological evidence in the rape kit. Because back then there wasn't any DNA testing. It was called ABO type testing. This is the blood type that each one of us has, A, B, or O. My blood type was B. The rape kit was never tested at trial. A judge granted me access to the evidence in 1988. He directed that I will have a representative represent me during the testing. A company called Life Codes that was in Westchester, New York at the time. The testing was done in the medical examiner's office here in New York City. The supposed testing was never done. I'll get back into that, but the report on the testing said there wasn't any biological evidence to test, even though the victim said, she felt something wet running down her leg. So the motion was subsequently denied because there wasn't any biological evidence to test. 6 years later, 1994, New York State was one of the first states in this country to pass a DNA statute. He said if any prisoner, regardless of the circumstances, you can have 20 witnesses saying you're guilty of something. Any prisoner that's claimed they're innocent of the crime can file, petition the court to test the evidence to find out whether or not they was truly innocent or guilty. This law came out in August of 1994. 2 months later, I was one of the first prisoners to file a pro se petition. That means I did it without the help of any legal representation. 2 months later, I submitted this petition to the court. 3 months after that, the court granted me access to the DNA evidence. Said, look, you can test it, you can have it tested. The problem that arose after that was the evidence disappeared. Remember, it went to the medical examiner's office in 1988. If it had remained in the medical examiner's office, I wouldn't be here today. I wouldn't be here today if it had stayed here. And the problem was, after 1988, nobody from the Bronx County Property Clerk's office, where the evidence was initially stored after the trial, came to pick it up. There was multiple requests, somebody to come pick up the evidence, and there was multiple requests that were sent to all the district attorney's offices, the Bronx County, Queens County, these different evidence places to come pick up evidence. And when they didn't come pick it up, what the ME's office did was just pack it in these big barrels and ship it off to warehouses around the state, around the city. New York City has court evidence, paperwork, evidence that they store in different warehouses. Sandy actually destroyed some of the evidence in these warehouses 4 years ago. But the evidence was shipped to a warehouse in Queens, Pearson Place warehouse. But the problem was, the paperwork came in 6 different parts. The Bronx was writing different information on it. The district attorney's office was putting different information on it. The police department was putting different information on it. So nobody was really checking to find out where the evidence was located. I started trying to find it because the judge granted me access to it. Subsequently, that motion was denied because the city said this evidence cannot be found. I got depressed, but fortunately, New York is one of the few states that you can file motions for the rest of your life as long as you're incarcerated. So every 2 years, I filed a new petition. I want the DNA evidence. Now, don't get me wrong, I was filing other petitions to try to get out of jail. Y'all got the wrong person. I had alibi witnesses, the identification testimony, but I consistently filed a DNA petition every 2 years. Every 2 years it got granted. The judge directed the Bronx District Attorney's Office, the police department, find this evidence. And when they claimed they couldn't find it, the motion got denied. I hired a lawyer in 1998 to try to find some more evidence. They found the victim's clothing. They said there wasn't any biological evidence to test on it. Motion got denied again. Now, I went to the parole board in 2000. At this time, I had 16 years in, a sentence of 16 to 40. And I was actually in a catch-22 situation. Legally, the parole board could not release me. Why? I did the minimum amount of time, and after you serve your minimum, you're eligible for parole. I was in a catch-22 situation because I refused to take any responsibility for a crime I didn't commit. You have a drug crime, they want you to take some drug programs. Violent crime, you take some, alternative to violence. I had a rape case. So I was mandated to take sexual offender programming. I refused. I went to the parole board in 2000, got denied. I went in 2002, got denied. I went in 2004, I got denied. And I realized I was wasting my time. Because the in-house parole officer told me they can't even release you. I was telling them what I'm doing in the courts, I'm telling them about DNA, and they said to me, for the purpose of this parole hearing, that's irrelevant. That's irrelevant. You're a convicted man right now. You have to deal with that conviction. And we advise you to try to take a program to try to better your opportunities and chances for release. But I tell you the truth, I come from a big family. I had 5 sisters. I have 4 older sisters, and I have like 15 nieces now. And There was no way in the world that I was going to take responsibility for something I didn't do. I mean, I tell people if it was maybe just a fight I had got into and something like that, but there's no way. But it's interesting because I'm really gonna, tell the truth. I was getting down and depressed, and I was understanding now that I was becoming a burden to my family. I was the first one and the only one in my family that went to prison. And I said to my brother one time, I said I may have to change my strategy to try to come home. I was actually considering taking a class and, going, saying I did this crime and going through the circumstances. My brother was like, no way. My sister too. They was like, no way. I'm like, I'm doing this time. And my sister said, we all doing this time with you. We all doing this time. We all suffering. I lost both my parents in there. My mother passed away a year after I went upstate. My dad died 15 years later. Couldn't go see either one of them. My dad never came to see me. He was a former correction officer himself. Said he could never come see me in those circumstances. Supported me, to the day he passed, though. But this is the circumstances and the things that I was fighting, though. I had internal fight, outside fights, and, and I don't really think I was considering, taking some type of programming, but, having that reassurance from my family, was something that was really, really touching. And it even got to the point where I had the nieces and nephews, when they got older, they was coming up to see me. It made it easier for everybody. Okay, I don't need a visit every week. I don't need, to make it harder on anybody than it has to be, though. So, 2006, I was supposed to go back to the parole board. I was supposed to go back, and I had made a decision that I am not going back. I am not going back to the parole board, telling them my story again, because, like I said, they could not release me regardless of the circumstances. It was by law. So this is the things that I was dealing with while I was incarcerated. I had to find something to do while I was in there, because I could not fight my case 24/7. It's impossible. I wanted to, believe you, I wanted to fight my case 24/7. So I started doing things that was going to help me do this time, though. I went back to school while I was in there. Now, initially I went back to school because it was free. I'm going to tell you the truth. It was free, and, because I didn't really want to do anything else. And I realized going back to school kept me out of trouble, and because I wanted to do well. I wanted to pass, and, I got my associates in there. I came home with about 99 credits because eventually, they eliminated the college programs, but it was about trying to stay functional. I started playing chess. I started doing things, playing, Scrabble, things that kept me out of trouble. Because in jail, you get caught up, unfortunately. You get caught up in the drugs, you get caught up in the gangs, you get caught up in arguing with the administration. And this is what I was doing when I first went in. I was arguing with the administration on a regular basis. On a regular basis until I started writing. And started covering myself. I went to the hole for the first time in 2000 because I refused to give up DNA. Had went to the special housing unit, which is solitary confinement, for 16 years. In 2000, I went for the first time. Why? Because New York State has a law that says any person that's been convicted of a violent offense must give up DNA. I refused. They threw me in special housing unit. Because my attitude was this: I'm claiming I'm innocent. I know I didn't commit the crime. But the state want to take my DNA. Now, I have this idea that paranoia brings about total awareness. I was definitely paranoid when they was talking about coming to get my DNA, because I didn't want my DNA to wind up in the rape kit. I don't know how many of y'all, see the documentary Making a Murderer, but this is the claim that that man has, that his, DNA from an old case was taken and put into a new case. And I didn't want to deal with that. So I went into the box, and I stayed there for a little while, and, my family advised me, look, you're going to stay in the box indefinitely. that was the attitude that the system had. You're going to stay in the box until you give us DNA. I eventually gave it up. I didn't want to stay in there for something, like that, so I gave up the DNA. And I must say, thank God that it wasn't tampered with, because, as I said, I kept getting denied every time I put in a request to try to get DNA tested. So in 2005, my family and I reached out to the Innocence Project. One of the first things the staff attorney, Vanessa Parkin, told me, she said, Alan, you've been looking for your evidence for about 11, basically 20 years now. And I said, I don't have anything to lose. And the interesting part, she wrote a letter to the Bronx County District Attorney's Office. This letter was forwarded to the police department. And the letter basically said, let's find this man's evidence once and for all, bring this case to a closure. Now, I don't know whether they believed I was guilty or not all the time I was filing those motions or whatever. I don't care what the reason is, but they decided to go look for the evidence. This is the interesting part. Now, I've been looking for the evidence for years. Come to find out in a deposition, now a police sergeant testified that when he started looking for the evidence, he found my paperwork in a garbage bag, an unlabeled garbage bag with other garbage. Now think about this. I've been in jail 20 years at this point. Why would my paperwork be in a garbage bag right there on the floor? Remember what I said, paranoia brings about total awareness. It's my thought that the last time I had filed a Freedom of Information request to try to find that paperwork, they had the paperwork. They had it, they threw it away. And what they was doing that we subsequently found out, they was throwing away the paperwork. And it's like throwing away the treasure map. You would never be able to find the treasure. And the warehouses that the city was utilizing to store evidence, it had evidence that was 70 years old. Some of those barrels had liquids leaking out of it, which makes it kind of, toxic. Nobody knows what was in there. And what the police department was doing when they needed evidence, they won't go in the back and throw away the evidence that's been there for 60 years. What they was doing was going to the shelves in the front and taking evidence that was 5, 6, 7 years old and throwing it away. New York City was granted a grant from the National Institute of Health to find rape kits and evidence after my case. New York City has not exonerated one person in 10 years on DNA evidence. They haven't turned over one piece of DNA evidence in 10 years. Why? Because before my case, they used to offer people lowball settlements and don't take any responsibility for what they did in regards to wrongful conviction, in regards to not finding evidence. I decided to change that. I flatly refused to take any type of lowball settlements, and we went to trial in 2010. And we exposed the city. There's over 30 cases in New York City where evidence is lost, which means there's 30 men and women that's dealing with charges, convictions, that they will never be able to overturn and get back. 4 of those men testified at my civil trial. 2 of them was on parole that took sexual offender programming because they had young children when they was locked up. And 2 of them were still locked up because they didn't take any program. But the one common denominator that all 5 of us had in common, the evidence was lost and it couldn't be found. And we all was claiming that we was innocent. And it gets better. We all received the same reasons and excuses in regards to why we couldn't get the evidence. The only thing they was changing was the names on the template. They didn't know where the evidence was, but they was claiming the evidence got burned up in a fire, asbestos, floods. Now they got real excuses because Sandy did flood some of those warehouses. But they was consistently telling people that they didn't know where the evidence was. The city was found liable in my civil rights case. We beat them for $18 million. That judgment was subsequently cut down. But we was able to show that the city had a pattern and practice of losing evidence of people that was wrongfully convicted. And what I try to focus on is less about the wrongs in the criminal justice system that happens because mistakes happen. And it's about taking responsibility when these mistakes do happen. What I try to focus on is the public safety aspect. Because of 2/3 of the over 300 exonerations that the Innocence Project has across the country, the actual perpetrator went on to commit another murder and another sexual assault. Another murder and another sexual assault. And my problem with this is, when law enforcement sometimes know they got the wrong person, because some people are actually set up. Some people are actually set up, and they know they have the wrong people sometimes. And it's almost like you're giving, the actual perpetrator a free rein to go out there and commit a new crime. Take, for instance, my case. Now, the actual perpetrator can never be prosecuted because there was a statute of limitations of 5 years at the time. But wouldn't it make sense to put the evidence through a national database to try to find out who the actual perpetrator is? The city refuses. They refuse it. They're the only one that got the power to do it. You have a case where Jeffrey Duskovich in Westchester, he was a 16-year-old man at the time in 1990. His classmate was raped and murdered. He goes to the precinct to try to say, look, I want to help the police. Anything I can help you with. 48 hours later, he's under the table in a fetal position, confessing to a crime he didn't commit. 10 years later, he writes the district attorney, says, look, put the DNA in the data bank. Just find out who it is. She refuses. It's not until a new DA comes in office, put the DNA in the database, find out, oh, it wasn't Mr. Deskovich. It's another guy that committed the murder and the rape. And guess where this other guy is at the time? 16 years later, he's in jail for rape and a murder, which means if the actual perpetrator had been caught 16 years prior, that victim would still be alive. If that DA had put that DNA in a database 10 years later, that victim would still be alive. And this is the problem we have when it comes to law enforcement, because nobody wants to admit they made mistakes. Right out here in Brooklyn, we had a new DA. In the last 2-3 years, he had over 20 exonerations. None of those cases involved DNA. Not one of those cases involved DNA. But he was able to show that 20 men didn't get a fair trial. Now, I don't know if all of them are innocent or not. I would assume all of them are innocent. But 20 men that may be innocent of crimes that they didn't commit. Now, we're talking about murders, rapes, and violent crimes. That the prior DA just looked at it like, hey, I'm closing cases. We have 2 conviction integrity units in this city right now. One in Brooklyn and one in the Bronx. The Bronx has a new district attorney, and it remains to be seen. Staten Island don't have a conviction integrity unit. Queens does not have one. And Manhattan has one for the last 5 years, but nobody has been exonerated, which means it has no teeth. And I say this to say we all must find a way to get more involved in the system, especially young people. When you get those jury notices, you have to get involved, because we can't sit on the sideline and complain about the system. When we get a jury notice, we don't want to get involved. We have to get involved in the system. And we can't be reacting all the time, because when reacting, you're always a day late and a dollar short. You have to get involved the same way they tell you to get involved in the election process. You have to get involved in the system and hold people accountable. You have to hold the system accountable for the wrongs they commit. Because, I'm into my 32nd year of dealing with this. And I could even go 5 back and say, 5 more. But this is part of my life now. This is who I am. I can never look back and try to just disregard the 22 years I served. I got some brothers that served 30 years. I got some that served 40 years. I try to advise men and women when they come home from a situation. I mean, I know what it works for me. This is a form of therapy for me to be able to give back and try to inform people about, the pitfalls and don't despair. Don't feel sorry for me. Don't show pity for me. Get out there and fight. Get out there and fight, because I was able to fight through that and come home in a relatively, functioning way where I can give out information and still, move on with my life. Life is difficult. It don't supposed to be easy, but it's supposed to be fair. This is all we have to ask for when it comes to these type of situations. July 6, 2006, I walked out of court after 22 years, after they tested that DNA, and they realized it wasn't me. Now, I got an apology from the Bronx County District Attorney's, assistant prosecutor, and it was great, but at the end of the day, I really didn't need it, but I appreciate it, because I understand it came from a heart. And what people realize more so, what more people need to realize, is just mercy. The book y'all been reading about, Brian Stevenson, and one of the, the deepest, profound statements he's saying there, it's about capital punishment. If you don't have the capital, you will face the punishment. Regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the crime, if you don't have the right type of capital when you're dealing with the system, you will face the punishment. I mean, I had a retained attorney. When I got arrested back in 1984, and I felt that I was okay, my rights will be, covered. But found out later on, he was a drug and gun lawyer. In most type of cases like that, people take pleas, and he probably really wasn't ready to defend me. I was offered 3 years in jail. A lot of people told me if I committed this crime, I would have been a fool not to take that. 3 years in jail. And the system sometimes, you would think, you see the TV shows. This is something else I wanted to talk about. You see the TV shows, Law and Order, CSI, where you have all these different things that go on. It's false. My fiance passed a lie detector test about my whereabouts on June 28th, 1984, that I was in Queens. We informed the district attorney's office that she passed a lie detector test, which means if she's telling the truth, that means I couldn't be where somebody's trying to say I was. They informed the judge. They informed the judge while my fiance was ready to testify. And the judge turned to her and said, if you speak on this lie detector test, not only will I hold you in contempt, I will throw you in jail. Which means it was less about justice. It was less because on TV they hold a recess and say, hey, if she's telling the truth, we got to find out what's really going on. It's not like that. It's not like that, because a lot more people do not get involved when these type of cases are going on. We don't get involved. We don't get involved unless we're personally involved. And in closing on that point, I'd like to reference something that Just Mercy talks about, how if somebody's killed in a DUI accident, we want to lock that person up, regardless of the circumstances. But then, what if that person is your family or friend? And it's a mistake they made, some different circumstances. Now we have to, start considering, well, maybe this person should get mercy, or where should we lean? And this is the same attitude that we need to take when it comes to the criminal justice system. We need to be more passionate about it and consider the people that's coming through the system, because, I really can't make excuses for people, for theft and all that, but sometimes we have to, because of the circumstances. We don't know what people, are going through in life, and, the things that happen. I've been home 10 years now. And if not for DNA, I'd still be in a jail cell, in a cage. I got comfortable in that cage after a while. But my point is though, it's much better to be home than to be in a cage. And even though I was making that my home at the time, we adapt to situations, we adapt to hardships, we make the best of what we have to do. Thank you for this opportunity. Yes, please.
We have a microphone here. If anyone wants to come up and ask a question. Questions? Comments?
When you finally got released from prison, what was your initial feeling once you finally declared to be a free man?
That's interesting. I was kind of nervous to ride public transportation because I didn't want people to realize I didn't know how to use the Metro card. But then I realized you got people that never been away that don't know how to use the Metro card also. So I just had to really learn to get over myself. I mean, people bumped into me, I was saying, excuse me, because it was like, I'm just glad to be home. And so I had to really learn to get out of my way because I was nervous, I was paranoid, and going through all those different things. I couldn't go to the store by myself initially, but one of the best things that helped me, I went back to school, a month later, and I started mingling, students and people like yourself on the campus, and I was kind of nervous at that because, I'm in class in the daytime, and I'm 45 years old when I came home, and I got, students in there 18, 19, 20, and this, I was like, y'all can't help me? But then I was like, well, you know how to use a cell phone now? I was like, okay, I get your point. So, I was nervous and scared, but putting one foot before the other and having people that I really understood that had my back and, was there for me, it was about just learning to get out of my own way.
I also have one more question. How hard was it for you to adapt to the new life you had after prison, after being in prison for 22 years?
Well, it was rough though. And like what I just previously said, it was learning to get out of my own way. Another example, I slept on a cot basically 20 years. I come home, I got a king size bed, and half the bed, for like months had clothes and books on it. I didn't know how to sleep on a big bed. And, I was so used to that small bed. And, it wasn't until later on that I started clearing the bed. I mean, another story, when I was taking showers upstate, you took everything out of the shower, the soap, the shampoo, and I was doing that when I came home. I was taking the soap and the shampoo out of the shower, and, I had to learn to be able to laugh at myself because I went into an abnormal environment, and I had to make that normal. And then I came home to a normal environment that felt abnormal. So I had to make that normal again. So a lot of it is, like I said, getting out of your own way and being able to laugh at yourself and not being afraid to ask for help. Because, walking around the city, I was born and raised in New York City, and a lot of times, things look different. Just walking around certain neighborhoods, and it's like, boy, deja vu. It seemed like I've been here before, but just learning to just be normal in this big city. It takes a lot because, another example, the headphones with the cells. I used to think people was talking to me all the time. They was on their headphones, on their cells, and I was like, hey, what's going on? And so nervousness and laughing at myself was so many different things after 2 decades, and that I just had to be comfortable with it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Yeah. Come.
Were you ever able to forgive the person who convicted you? And if so, how long did it take?
Most definitely. Unfortunately, victim in my case passed away 7 years after I got convicted. But if you can't forgive people, because I don't know the circumstances why I really got picked up. I know a lot of other cases, I've seen cases where people were set up directly. And, I don't know the circumstances, what happened with my case, but, it's my belief that if I wasn't able to forgive her and move on, that I may have still been in jail. Because I wouldn't have been able to grow. I would have still been hard-bent and focusing on why, how come, and that would have been my focus. It would have been my focus while I was in there. I mean, if it was somebody I knew that set me up, I don't know if my thought would have been different, but because it was a stranger and the only time I met her was during the trial, it's like I can't focus on somebody I don't even know. So, I forgave her a long time ago, even though I never met her, and it wasn't till after I got exonerated, I found out she passed away because a news station called and they wanted us to do an interview together, and, but that's when we found out she had passed away though.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
People aren't leaving because of you, they have another class. So.
You got it.
So, through all your struggles, what would you say is the best lesson, or in what way did you, use what happened to you and turn it into something that allowed you to be an even better person once you were exonerated?
I think the ability to forgive. Because I can carry this burden and act like the world owed me something. You have to learn to put things behind you and move forward. I mean, it's the same way you put your education behind you, you find a job, you put your childhood discretions behind you now that you're an adult. I had to learn to put that totally behind me. I mean, it's part of who I am, but I could not let it define me. And, part of it was I had, I spoke to a lot of exonerees. Like I said, this project has over 300 exonerees. They have a conference every year where they bring all the exonerees and families together, have panels. And part of my transition was talking to the exonerees that was home before me. Getting that advice, how you did it, what you had to do to get, reestablish your credit, all those little things just to be a functional person again without the mental and the physical burden that goes along with being an exoneree. So just, having that ability, that mindset that I need to put this behind me, but also, being able to speak with people that was there before me, because if I was the first one, I don't know if I would have had the same attitude. So being able to lean on and ask questions.
It's not really a question, it's just a statement. Like, basically my family is still going through the same thing, but it's not a rape charge, it's a gun charge. So my uncle had put in jail for 10 years. And then the court, the judge that they had, he was racist. So, like 10 years later, he had a parole, and then that judge found out that the police and everything was setting him up about everything because he had a BB gun, not a gun charge, so they tried to put a murder on him. So 10 years, he got parole, he got free. Boom. But once he walked out of prison, it's like a cop was waiting for him again. And they waited for him when he came out of jail, so he didn't even get a chance to go home yet or say hi to nobody. So they got him again, they arrested him. Now they making him do 40 years in prison for the same thing, and they added, so basically they trying to make him do 50 years. He already did 10 years, so they trying to make him do 40 years again. And then when he's trying to ask for parole, they declining it because it's like they added everything together in that one case that he did not do.
We're going to have to talk after this to really find out what's going on. That sounds like one of them crazy cases, and this is why I tell people we have to, stay informed about the criminal justice system because too many times we reacting to what's going on, and if we stay ahead of it, we can try to neutralize whatever's going on, before we even get that far, because like I said, the hardest thing to do is get back to conviction once it happened. So, we have to find, it's almost like just putting the DA's office on blast, because they don't like publicity, especially when they're doing something underhanded and wrong. They do not like that spotlight put on them. And a lot of times, this is what we have to do. We have to become more proactive, and we have the tools, especially with social media, because this type of information wasn't out there 20 years ago, but now we can, you can mobilize people. You can get people to come down to the courthouse and all type of different things, send petitions out there, and that's what's needed in all these type of cases. So we can definitely talk some more about that though. Any more questions? Be shy now.
What do you think about our system?
So what do I think about the system?
Yeah, say like for your evidence, right? You're saying like too many places, so could not file it, right? So what do you think like about the system at State Hall? Like anything that you think that you want to change from what we have to change?
She asking what would I change about the system and the way it is. That's a great question, because I'm one of those people that don't really like to get on, even an individual police officer that shoot a 10-year-old kid in the back. My thing is, yes, we like to blame the officer, but I want to condemn the whole police department. I want to condemn the system, because it's the system that allows that to happen. Now, we can, like I said, we can get on the individual. We always do. And what happens, it happens again. I want to condemn the system, because it's the system that allowed me to stay in jail for 20 years, because they was just losing evidence. And they wasn't taking responsibility. I mean, once 5 people, write, the courts and said, look, our evidence is lost, the natural thing would be like, okay, let's try to find why evidence is lost and clean it up. But they don't do that. They don't do that. They allow 30 people pieces of evidence to be lost. So we need to find a way. I mean, it's rough because things like this is happening on a consistent basis. But we need to find a way to try to condemn the system instead of fighting in individual cases when these things pop up, because, we mobilize, we protest for 2 months, and then we die down, and 6 months later, something else happened. You got wrongful convictions almost happening every month across the country. I mean, every month across the country. Now, you have a lot more states becoming, conscious of it. New York is not one of them, unfortunately. So we have to find a way to just stay, stay alert, stay informed. And when things like this happen, we have to, try to build up, as far as reaching out to people that really, really try to make a difference when these cases and these type of events happen across the country.
Like the programs you're doing, and Brian Stevenson is doing, these kinds of programs are the ones that are going to help create programs within the system where officers are going to learn how to be trained properly, right?
And training goes a long way towards making reforms in the system. But you can train people all day, every day. However, unless you start making significant policy reforms at the top and changing the people that setting, the regulations, things gonna make the same. Things gonna remain the same. Things are gonna remain the same, because I'm of the belief that if you put the right people in charge and you hold people accountable, things will happen. But nobody's really being held accountable because the people at the top do not really want to make changes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
I just wanted to hear the happy ending of your story a little more, in the sense of when When the Innocence Project became aware of your case and they found the DNA evidence, I mean, did they just literally like go to the warehouse and start going through like boxes and bags and they found it? But it's amazing.
It's interesting because, like I said, the DA sent that letter to the police department. And after they sent them that letter, they found the evidence because the sergeant testified that, the paperwork was in a bag and he remembered it over there. So, if that letter was never sent, if it wasn't me, in other words, just making a request, I would still be locked up. So it took, the Innocence Project because they had a history of working with that particular district attorney for her to write the letter, to follow up. And therein lies the problem. It shouldn't have to go that far for them to try to, do something that they're, legally bound to do.
Wow. So they found it after all those years. And I mean, it's I don't know, I'm just, yeah, it shouldn't have happened.
It shouldn't happen.
There has to be change because it shouldn't be possible.
But this is even more interesting. And remember I said in 1988, the medical, it went to the ME's office. The scientist never tested it. She actually testified that she was told to only test important information. So basically, it was a deliberate attempt not to really release me because if they had tested it right there, I would have got released 4 years later. So it was one of those things where we're not trying to correct the mistakes we made because we know you probably didn't commit this crime any other way. So this is why when it came 4 years later, it was never tested.
And they want a conviction.
Yes.
They want a conviction.
Convictions lead to promotions, promotions lead to raises, and unfortunately that shouldn't be a criteria in the criminal justice system when we deal with people's lives.
Anybody else? Questions? Comments?
Thank you, everyone.
Or inquiries?